It is clear that the enthusiasm, the energy in the Democratic Party is on the Democratic Socialist side. That is one of the reasons I think that voters are starting to say, wait a minute, this state is in decline, and Democrats keep doubling down by playing with and being terrified of that far left wing. And it's not going to end. In fact, I think the Democratic Socialists, they're emboldened now. I mean, they're winning. They have the Democratic Party on the run right now.
Welcome to the Op Edge, the Gazette's opinion podcast, where we bring you cutting-edge perspectives from Colorado's top newsmakers, columnists, and more. I'm Jimmy Sangenberger, investigative columnist and your host for the program. Dick Wadhams is a political savant. He has a background in Republican Party politics that includes running several pivotal campaigns, including the last time a Republican won for governor, which was Bill Owens, and now Senate Majority Leader John Thune in South Dakota. When he first ran for the U.S. Senate, Dick Wadhams ran his campaign. Wadhams is also the former chairman of the Colorado Republican Party and has been an analyst on political matters for many years since, including as a columnist for the Gazette. Dick Wadhams, welcome to the Op Edge.
Thank you, Jimmy. Nice to be with you.
Good to have you here. There's so many directions that we can take it, but let's start with your party, the Republican Party. When you look at the current state of affairs of the GOP in Colorado, with the voter registration being, I think, about 22%, the least of all the major political parties when you include unaffiliated voters, how do you sort of assess the GOP and its positioning in Colorado at this point?
Well, there's been a dramatic change in the Colorado electorate over the last 10 years. I mean, Jimmy, for decades, Colorado was accurately described as a third Republican, a third Democrat, a third unaffiliated. Sometimes those numbers would bounce around, but basically it would come down to that basic third. Starting about 12 years ago, as this huge influx of people started moving into the state, unaffiliated voters started rising. And now, here we are in 2026, and a majority of Colorado's elected or registered voters are unaffiliated. And Democrats are down to about 24%, and Republicans at 22%. And so the electorate is much different than it used to be. And both political parties have paid a price for this move towards unaffiliated status. Now, we both know some of these unaffiliated voters are really Democrats in disguise or Republicans in disguise. But I still think the majority of these 51% of the electorate truly could be swing voters that, depending on what's going on in a particular election or campaign, could vote for either way. Now, they've been voting Democratic because they don't like Donald Trump. I mean, that's pretty clear in the polling. But on the other hand, I think they're also getting very wary of how the state is in a state of decline right now.
And in that regard, in terms of its impact on both parties, I know I asked you about the GOP, but it also would be just as much, I think, to the Democrats when you have so many unaffiliated voters. And as you said, some Republican in disguise, some Democrat in disguise, others who will go either way, as oftentimes many, even Republicans or Democrats, were historically willing to do split ticket voting.
Sure.
How do you think this unaffiliated mindset has really impacted both of these parties?
Well, interestingly enough, both parties seem to be moving to their extremes. I mean, Democrats are more and more dominated or greatly influenced by the Democratic Socialist wing of their party. The Republican Party is getting more and more dominated and influenced by the MAGA wing of the party. And so you've seen both parties kind of move to their extremes. And frankly, I think that is another dynamic that moves people into unaffiliated voters.
In terms of unaffiliated voters choosing to be unaffiliated, what do you put that at as far as the rationale behind it? Is it just fed up with both parties? Is it that traditionally independent mindset of Colorado voters? Because it is fairly unique among the states to have more than half of all registered voters not a part of any political party.
the people who have moved here, 800,000 people have moved here since about 2011. That gave us an eighth congressional seat in Colorado, and it contributed to these new affiliation numbers. But a lot of these new people, Jimmy, they're younger, they're more socially liberal. I mentioned earlier, they really do not like Trump, but they also just don't like political parties, even though they've been voting Democratic for the last few election cycles. I'm not sure that they are totally locked into voting Democratic forever. In fact, I actually think that a lot of these voters that have been voting Democratic are getting more concerned about the direction of our state, and they are probably more right of center on fundamental tax and budget issues than maybe we earlier thought. Look at Proposition HH back in 2023. That was something put on the ballot in terms of a property tax increase. Governor Polis and the whole Democratic Party threw their weight behind that, and it lost by 20 points. Now, it wouldn't have lost by 20 points if not huge numbers of unaffiliated voters had voted against it. And what that tells me, if you get an issue in front of these voters and they're not tainted by their dislike of Trump, they might not be that far away from Republicans in terms of fundamental tax and budget issues. So I still think the verdict is not in yet about where these voters settle down, and that's why I think as we get into future elections, they could give us some surprises.
In that regard, Dick Wadhams, when we look at the Republican Party, with the rise of unaffiliated voters, right now the Colorado GOP is actively in litigation to remove unaffiliated voters from the Republican Party primary, to have a closed primary. Now, I could see virtue in this from the standpoint of the party if you're simply saying this is sort of an exclusive club and we want to make it Republicans only. But when you have 51 or so percent of Colorado voters, more than that actually, who are registered unaffiliated, and you're cutting them out of the process, well, Democrats are still welcoming yous into the election process. How does that impact Republicans, especially as they try to build up the party in the future?
I honestly cannot figure out this mindset, Jimmy. This notion that we don't want these unaffiliated voters infecting our pure nomination process. You cannot win without unaffiliated voters in a general election, and frankly, Jimmy, that's the way it's always been. I mean, it's always been hard for Republicans to win statewide, even when we were a third. That third of unaffiliated voters, even back then, were very fickle, and you had to run really strong candidates and campaigns. In fact, I think back to when I ran Governor Bill Owens' campaign in 1998 and Senator Wayne Allard's campaign in '96. They both had really tough primaries. In fact, Wayne Allard was definitely the underdog to Attorney General Gail Norton in '96. And I will tell you, Senate President Tom Norton of Greeley actually had a lead in early polling over Bill Owens. We had to run our campaigns in those primaries to not only win a Republican nomination, but to run a campaign that could come out of that primary and appeal to unaffiliated voters. Well, that's what we did. That's why Bill Owens became the first governor to be elected Republican governor in 28 years. And that's why Wayne Allard won a very underdog victory in the primary and the general election, because we didn't allow ourselves to run a campaign that would not be relevant in a general election. So this mindset of forget unaffiliated voters in the primary. No, you have to think about them. You really have to think about them now because they can vote in our primaries. But even back then, you had to. And frankly, Jimmy, I'm kind of out of the campaign management business. I loved it, but I'm done with it. I would have loved to have run a primary campaign with the current law we have today. I think it's a great opportunity for Republicans. It's not a burden.
So then, in terms of the GOP, let's try and diagnose what's going on there for a moment. Obviously, there is significant influence of President Trump from the national level onto the Colorado Republican Party, but you have a slew of other influences and internal goals and objectives that a lot of times, to me, it seems like MAGA or Trump are used as token or branding opportunities for particular individuals who want to either be in leadership positions of the party or to get nominations, but really they have their own personal goals. In fact, I don't really think that President Trump is necessarily advocating for removing unaffiliated voters from the primary process, recognizing the state of affairs in Colorado, yet you have that big push. So how do you look at what's happening in the Republican Party these days?
Yeah, I don't. I agree with you. I do not think President Trump would think this is a very smart idea. He did very well with unaffiliated voters across the nation. And on top of it, President Trump has some great accomplishments to his credit as president, that I think unaffiliated voters respond to. I don't understand. They use Trump as kind of a weapon to say we don't want to have unaffiliated voters in our process. I don't understand that thinking, but I know this that a lot of these younger unaffiliated voters, they don't like Trump, and I don't think it's as much policy driven as they don't like his personality. They don't like the way he conducts himself a lot of the time. I don't think it's based on issues, but which tells me that, once again, that if Republicans will run real campaigns on real issues, that these voters are still up for grabs. But it's too often, I think, within our party that we use MAGA as a club to attack other Republicans, and I don't think it's very smart.
Hasn't that been the case for the Colorado GOP for a long time, though? I mean, when you were state party chair last, it was 2010, the advent of the Tea Party movement, that for several years, even heading into 2015, 2016, was very anti-Trump, interestingly enough, because they had certain views. He wasn't a true conservative. Ted Cruz resoundingly won what was then a caucus assembly process instead of the public primary like we have now. And at that moment, though, in 2010, you saw this resurgence, or this groundswell, rather, of activists that were shaping the party more and more.
Oh, I think the Tea Party, they came into being in 2009 after President Obama became president, and they really started in the aftermath of the passage of the big bill he passed at the beginning of his administration.
It was the stimulus package.
The stimulus package, thank you. So then we go through 2009 with that Tea Party really starting to emerge within the party. By the time we got to 2010, they were a huge impact on our nomination process. And frankly, I think it was a very positive part of our party. I remember, Jimmy, at the 2010 State Republican Assembly, I asked the delegates that assembled that day. We had about 3,500 delegates, and I said, please stand if this is the first time you've ever been a delegate to a state convention. Now, normally there's not a lot of turnover from one cycle to the next. Conservatively, I would say half of that convention all stood up, which really showed the impact of the Tea Party. Their activism, their involvement in the process helped us do some amazing things in 2010. We unseated 2 statewide elected Democrat officials. That hadn't been done since 1974. We unseated 2 incumbent Democratic members of Congress. That hadn't been done since 1964 in terms of that many. And we won a Colorado House of Representatives majority for the first time in 8 years. I mean, I can go on and on. The governor's race became a mess with Dan Mays, and then the Senate race, Ken Buck said some things at the end that kind of got him in trouble, and Bennett was able to win. But my overall point is that was a huge impact on the party. It definitely helped us win some big victories in 2010. And then they continued on. They didn't go away after 2010. They stayed involved in the party, and have been so since.
When we look at the Democratic side of the aisle, one of the interesting things, of course, is that they have full control, while the
Yes.
Republicans do not and are sort of out on an island of their own, it seems, at times. But when the Democrats are in charge, they've got their own problems internally, it seems, in terms of divisions, especially amongst the far left flank. And one of the challenges that I think a majority party has, and tell me if you agree or not, is that they often have excesses within their ranks where they want to push further and further left or right, which could be their own undoing.
Jimmy, I was fascinated. The Democratic State Assembly that was held in Pueblo a couple weeks before Republicans met, their incumbent U.S. senators, Michael Bennet and John Hickenlooper, and their outgoing Democratic governor, Jared Polis, all ignored the convention. They did not attend. Now, think about that. The three major elected Democratic officials in Colorado said, "We don't have the time to go to the Democratic State Assembly." Boy, if that does not tell you how far left that thing has become. And then, of course, you saw Congresswoman, I almost said Pat Schroeder, Diana DeGette, who actually barely made the ballot against a 28-year-old Democratic socialist. You saw John Hickenlooper basically concede the assembly to his Democratic Socialist challenger. You're seeing this in state legislative races. I mean, it is clear that the enthusiasm, the energy in the Democratic Party is on the Democratic Socialist side, and that is one of the reasons I think that voters are starting to say, "Wait a minute, this state is in decline," and Democrats keep doubling down by playing with and being terrified of that far left wing, and it's not going to end. In fact, I think the Democratic Socialists, they're emboldened now. I mean, they're winning. They have the Democratic Party on the run right now, and it's going to continue.
To that end, though, when we're talking about opportunities for the Colorado Republican Party, normally you would think that's a lane for the GOP to take advantage of and make some gains in the state. However, with the GOP being in its current straits and the Democrats veering to the left, does that mean the leftists will have more reign? Does that mean that the Republicans will have a tougher time making any sort of gains because of that disorganization, despite the openings there?
Well, that is the dilemma of this 2026 cycle. I think voters are more and more concerned about the direction of the state. They watch the Democratic Party go veering off to the left, and yet candidates and campaigns matter, Jimmy. I mean, it's not a matter of putting a Republican up and thinking they can win. The kind of candidate and the kind of campaign they run really does matter. And so I don't know. It's going to be very difficult for a Republican to win the governor's race or the U.S. Senate race or whatever. But I think they can be competitive, especially in the governor's race, because I think Bennett and Weiser are both they're both kowtowing to the far left of their party. A strong Republican candidate who can talk to the real issues, I think, could run a very strong race against either Bennett or Weiser. In fact, I would even say that Weiser really has, I think he's really come on lately in the Democratic race because he is moving to the left. And Bennett has run one of the most unimpressive campaigns I've ever seen from a Democratic incumbent like him. But frankly, if we put up the wrong candidate in this three-way primary, there will be no hope to even be competitive. And that's the challenge.
Now, how about Congress in the congressional races when we see right now 4 Democrat seats that are pretty solid blue? There's no one who seems to think that Republicans can possibly take any of those slots. But there are 4 Republican seats. However, Gabe Evans in the 8th Congressional District wrested that district from Yadira Caraveo, who was the Democrat occupant before. Jeff Hurd, though, also in a difficult situation in the 3rd Congressional District. Is it probably, in your view, the pathway for Republicans in terms of where to focus on with their energies, that it would be more in that direction of holding those 4 seats than probably anything else?
Yeah, holding the third, the fourth, and the fifth are they've got to be the priorities. The fourth, of course, is the most Republican district in the state. That's the Boebert district. And that should be fine. But the eighth district was designed to be competitive, and it is. I mean, here we are. This will only be the third election of the current eighth congressional district, Jimmy. It's already been held by a Republican and a Democrat, and and Gabe Evans, who I think has been an outstanding member of Congress, done everything right, and yet he's in the fight of his life because of the nature of the district. And obviously those four seats, Jimmy, play massively into the future of who runs the U.S. House of Representatives. Those four seats will matter in terms of whether Republicans can hold on to the majority or Democrats take the majority. Jeff Hurd I think he's once again he's been an outstanding incumbent. The third is certainly much more Republican than the eighth, but it's not the fourth district. And Jeff Crank, there's been a lot of attention. In fact, Vince Beesdeck, Vince wrote a really interesting piece about the fifth district just recently in the Gazette. And the brutal truth of the fifth is that it's gotten more competitive. El Paso County used to be this Republican bulwark. I mean, that nobody Democrat could touch. It ain't that way anymore. And so, but Jeff Crank has been once again a great congressman. He'll hold on to it. But those really have to be the priorities. Those three congressional seats, not only from Colorado's standpoint, but from a national standpoint.
And priorities, of course, for Democrats to target those seats in turn. And I would add, in terms of El Paso County, also Douglas County has been another rock-ribbed Republican.
Yeah, of course, Douglas is still in the fourth, but
yes.
But nevertheless, Douglas has not seen some of the same changes. Jimmy, you're right.
Yeah, Dick Wadhams, just a little bit more with you. When we talk about the congressional seats, this brings to mind the possibility of gerrymandering of Colorado's congressional districts, like we just saw the vote in Virginia to give Democrats all but one safe Republican seat. Similarly, we are expecting to see an initiative that would, they say temporarily, undo the Congressional Redistricting Commission that we have in Colorado, and similarly make it so that Republicans have just one seat, which would likely be Lauren Boebert's, and the Democrats take the remaining seven. If you have 2 or 3 Republican seats that are already very competitive, what real gain is there or purpose is there in saying we should gerrymander the districts to give Democrats a decisive advantage when they already seem to have some play?
This is being totally driven by Washington liberal organizations run by Eric Holder and by House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. This is not a Colorado-based campaign. There are a couple of Democratic operatives who are going to be paid very well to run the campaign, but this is coming out of Washington. And it is reprehensible. It is despicable, Jimmy, because Colorado voters voted by 71% to pass the independent Congressional Redistricting Commission. It worked very well. In fact, I think it worked out perfectly for the seats that exist today. We were talking about the 8th district earlier. For them to do this mid-decade is just reprehensible. And there's no doubt that if they get on the ballot and we actually have new elections in 2028, they could make this a 7-1 delegation. But it's despicable. It will deepen partisan divisions in Colorado. It will move Colorado to the left even more than it is today and contribute to the steady decline of Colorado. And it's got to be defeated. I think it can be defeated. And I will have to admit, President Trump started this fight. Now, Democrats have been gerrymandering for years, so this is not a new concept on their part. But it's unfortunate that it was started by Trump, and now we're in the middle of this fight because of it.
What does this do for unaffiliated voter numbers as you see the Democrats lurch more to the left, but likely retain power, at least for now, very strongly because Republicans have the disorganized infighting. They're focused on issues like stolen elections and so forth that bog the party down. So many of the things that we've been talking about. Do you anticipate that the ranks of unaffiliated voters will only grow from here, where it's about 52, 53% of registered voters, that we could see it grow to 60%, maybe even 70% at some point.
No doubt, Jimmy. There's going to be, I don't think it'll be a dramatic increase any given year, but it will be a steady increase, just like we've seen for the last probably, 8 years in Colorado. So, yeah, I think we're headed towards 60% and beyond unaffiliated voters. And by the way, I think these unaffiliated voters have an innate sense of fair play and also of they want competition. And I think that's why the Democrats might be playing with fire on this redistricting issue, because I think that might be a bridge too far for a lot of unaffiliated voters. So they might be pushing this too far. But I think, yeah, unaffiliated voters are going to continue to grow. They have no love for either political party, even though they vote one way or another. But yeah, that's where we're headed.
Obviously, the legislature has been wrestling with a significant budget shortfall, $1.5 billion, really, many say of their own making. The Gazette has editorialized to that effect. But one of the stopgaps for Coloradans has largely been the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, in terms of putting limitations on government spending and also requiring a vote of the people to raise taxes, even if the legislature often circumvents that with fees. As we look at unaffiliated voters and as we look at the trajectory of the Colorado legislature, the General Assembly, how significant do you think Tabor will be moving forward?
I think Tabor is still in a very strong position, Jimmy. Kent Theory's organization did a poll just of unaffiliated voters a couple of months ago. And one of the interesting questions they put on that poll was, do you support keeping Tabor, or do you want it repealed? Essentially, that was the question. More than 60% of unaffiliated voters said they were strong supporters of Tabor.
Real quickly, when we look at the November elections and the state legislature, since we were just talking about that a little bit, is there any chance for Republicans to pick up any seats in the state House or Senate? Because it seems like historically, when the majority party has only one or two senators, for example, advantage in the Senate, in this case, that there's often more leverage for the minority party to hold some sway, which means if Republicans could maybe close the gap a little bit in the state Senate, that might make a difference.
Well, of course, the goal, to show you how far down we are in the legislature, the goal in this last election in 2024 was to keep the Democrats from having a supermajority in both houses. The Republicans actually picked up 3 seats, which was a real credit to Rose Puglisi, who was leading our House Republicans at the time. Jarvis Caldwell, who's the House Minority Leader now, is doing a great job. He's recruited some strong candidates, as has Cleve Simpson in the Senate. But the fact is, I think there's a possibility we could increase seats in both houses. Or, Jimmy, unfortunately, we might lose seats, too. If we have a gubernatorial nominee who craters, and that could pull down Republicans. If we have a strong gubernatorial nominee who's running a competitive race, that could help Republicans win seats. So that governor's race really impacts much more than just the governor's race itself. It actually will help our Republican legislative candidates and those members of Congress we talked about as well.
Finally, Dick Wadhams, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you're watching that you think, say, Gazette readers should be paying attention to, or that might be an underemphasized story in the political world here in Colorado?
Yeah, I think that this redistricting thing, it's not gotten a lot of attention yet. I don't think voters have really grabbed on to just what a power play it is and how unfair it is. And I think once voters realize that, they will be appalled and they will vote accordingly. But right now, it's just kind of an insider situation with people like you and me who are paying attention to it. I think that's the one that has the most potential impact, bad impact on Colorado in the future, but that voters aren't tuned into yet. So
many more things we could get to, Dick Wadhams. Thanks for joining us, Gazette columnist and Republican analyst. Appreciate your time here on the Op Edge.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Thanks for tuning in to the Op Edge. If you enjoyed today's episode, please drop us a like, subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, and be sure to share it with your friends and colleagues. For the Gazette, I'm Jimmy Sangenberger.